Hello, it's May 5th. I'm Matthew Ogden with your LPAC Evening Report. If you've seen yesterday's weekly report, you know that the LaRouche movement internationally has declared all-out war against the British Empire's WBGU global genocide scheme. Although what the WBGU report professes is, in effect, no different from what the British Empire has always stood for, not to mention its historic progenitors from Rome to Venice, that is, the radical reduction of the human population and the banning of all technological progress. This current utterance by the intellectual heirs of Prince Philip and Bertrand Russell goes far beyond what has been said previously by such satanic ideologues in terms of the sheer horror of the nightmare which is spelled out in printed form for the future of the human race. As Helga Tsepp-LaRouche made clear earlier this week, and as various so-called climate skeptics have since echoed, this report, along with the subsequent interview published by Schellenhuber in the FAZ, should be called out for what it is: the Greenies' Mein Kampf. This document, which calls for the willful self-murder of the human race, if allowed to be enacted through official policy of governments both in Europe and in Barack Obama's United States, would have an effect on the human population of this planet which would make Hitler look pale in comparison. Not only entire nations and peoples would be wiped out, but the human race as a whole, at least in its present recognizable form, would be threatened with virtual extinction. When you realize that we hung Nazis at Nuremberg for crimes which were indeed nightmarish in their effect, but then compare the extent of destruction achieved by the Nazi Party with that which is now spelled out in lurid detail in the WBGU's manifesto, the implied destruction of human life which Schellenhuber and his accomplices demand would, if enacted, dwarf the crimes against humanity perpetrated by Hitler. This fact, in and of itself, should cause the citizens of Germany to immediately reject all the proposals which have been published in their government's name, and to join Helga Tsepp-LaRouche's call for the immediate eradication and elimination of everything which even smells of this sort of greeny genocidal fascism. However, as is clearly documented by Helga in her article titled June 17th, the Day of German Resistance, this attempted global Gleichschaltung is not German in its origins, but purely British. This should not be a surprise, of course. A report which calls for the transcendence of traditional sovereignty concepts in the interest of a global governance architecture, for the imposition of a global green dictatorship, for the reduction of the human population to 1 billion people at most, could be nothing other than British in its origins, or rather, more precisely, the British manifestation of the Fourth Roman Empire. And why should it come as a surprise that the Queen is attempting to use Germany once again to foist her global eugenics schemes onto Europe and the rest of the world? However, to identify the purely British pedigree of the WBGU report, we need go no further than its research director himself, Professor Hans Joachim Schellenhuber. Beginning at least as far back as 2001, Schellenhuber has been an all-out British agent of influence, plain and simple. Appointed as the head director of East Anglia University's Tyndall Centre, the same East Anglia of ClimateGate fame, Schellenhuber has played a leading international role over the past decade as spokesman for the policy of so-called decarbonization and technological regression. In 2004, along with Tony Blair's science advisor, Sir David King, Schellenhuber was sent by Queen Elizabeth herself on the international diplomatic mission of attempting to intimidate George W. Bush into accepting the theory of anthropogenic climate change. Then, later that same year, at the German embassy in Berlin, during a British-German climate conference, Queen Elizabeth herself made a rare public appearance to confer upon Professor Schellenhuber the title of Honorary Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, a title which Schellenhuber graciously accepted. Schellenhuber then proceeded to become the top advisor to Angela Merkel on climate change, collaborating with none other than Prince Charles himself to lay the plans for the Copenhagen Climate Conference of 2009, and ultimately, after Copenhagen failed, to chair the WBGU and oversee the publication of the Social Contract for a Great Transformation Population Reduction Report. So ask yourself, could there be any doubt that Schellenhuber is anything more than a low-down, dirty British agent who has penetrated the ranks of the German government for the sake of the royal family in a mad attempt to resurrect the evil spirit of Adolf Hitler? And is it really a surprise that the same week this Manifesto for Global Genocide is published, none other than Prince Charles himself would come to Washington to meet with Obama and promote so-called sustainable agriculture and organic farming? Now, everything that LaRouche has published since the March 11th earthquakes in Japan confirms that, yes, indeed, humanity faces a dire threat to its existence. But it is not for the reasons which the British Empire claims in the name of pseudoscience. The real threat is the British Empire itself. The threat that mankind faces comes from the fact that we are faced with not so-called a sustainability crisis here on Earth, caused by something terrestrial in its origins, but rather we face great changes happening on the Sun and in the galaxy as a whole, great changes which are affecting our planet externally in increasingly dramatic ways, all while we continue to submit to the anti-human, anti-reason Zeusian dictatorship of the Fourth Rome and its associated monetary policies. If we really want to save mankind from these dangers which are now threatening our continued existence, we will immediately move to crush the WBGU and everything it represents, and call these quacks what they are, nothing more than the errand boys for Satan. And the best way to do that is to destroy the very foundations of the British Empire and its monetarist power. How do we do that? By ramming through Glass-Steagall. Only the reaffirmation of the Promethean principle inherent in our federal Constitution and embodied in the credit policy of FDR's Glass-Steagall will allow us to be able, from our position in the United States, to effect the global paradigm shift necessary to lead other nations in opposing and ultimately eliminating the oligarchical principle once and for all. The publication of the WBGU report should be seen as a universal rallying cry for patriots everywhere, and especially in the United States and Europe, to stand up and say no more to the murderous policies of the British Empire. Remember, for the patriots of the revolutionary generation who fought and defeated the British Empire in our revolution of 1776, it was the image of genocide and horror which they saw coming from the policies of the British East India Company and the death of over 10 million Indian people through induced famine in 1770 that convinced Washington and Franklin that revolution was the only option, and that an open war against the British Empire was necessary lest the entire world become subject to the genocidal schemes of the East India Company and its global empire. For us today, we similarly have no choice. Either we muster ourselves to the immediate creation of an international movement for resistance and defense of the human race through the revolutionary measures of the immediate reenactment of Glass-Steagall and the 25th Amendment removal of President Barack Obama, or the entire history of not only the United States, but all of Western civilization will have been in vain, as we sit back and allow the British Empire today to commit a genocide far worse than in India in the 18th century or in Europe under the Hitler regime. So the battle cry is clear. The time has come in which it is no longer acceptable to continue to tolerate the perpetuation of that ancient oligarchical tyranny which has for so long dominated the existence of our human species. It is time to realize and reaffirm the true image of man, not as a mere beast, subject to the whims of the gods of Olympus, but as a truly cosmic species, both in our created origin, as the intended product of billions of years of upward evolution of our planet and solar system, but also in terms of our creative potential, as a species whose destiny and mission is to be the managers and caretakers of our universe's ongoing creation. If you look back to the series of videos which LPAC TV has published over the recent several months, you see that the scientific revolution which our basement team is responsible for sparking could represent the beginnings of an unprecedented renaissance for the human race as a whole. In counterpoint to the anti-progress, limits to growth ideology embedded in the WBGU report, consider instead the philosophy of the great space pioneer Krafft Erika, who described the destiny of mankind as an extraterrestrial imperative. Krafft Erika, whose work was largely responsible for enabling the United States to achieve the manned exploration of space, identified the true political conflict which the world faced as being between those who wished to keep mankind confined to an animal existence on planet Earth, bounded by the finiteness of so-called natural resources, versus those who saw man's future as being a creature of the stars. In a speech he made in Huntsville, Alabama in 1971, Erika made this danger now facing Western civilization clear. The result is a new kind of disillusion, a wave of pessimism that tends to undermine man's confidence in a soaring future, and therewith in his nature, which some claim must be altered radically to conform with what is called insurmountable limitations. Confidence in a soaring future, spiritually as well as materially, is the essence of our techno-scientific civilization and Western man's greatest message to mankind. Erosion of this confidence threatens the value system and weakens the drive on which our monumental accomplishments rest ever since the dawn of the Renaissance. And nowhere are the roots of the Renaissance spirit more deeply embedded than in history's boldest social achievement, the United States of America. So with that in mind, what better day than today to reaffirm our extraterrestrial imperative and our nation's uniquely historic identity as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Alan Shepard's first flight, making him the first American in space. When we look back at this accomplishment and those other great milestones which followed in rapid succession, achievements which are a testament to both the beautiful potential embedded in the cultural history of our nation and to the unique power of the human race, we realize that although mankind as a species is a relative newcomer on the premises of local space-time, we are indeed endowed with a willful expression of the ultimate power which created our universe. And if we keep that image of who we are firmly in our mind, and resolve now to live up to our sacred mission, both as a nation and as a species, there is nothing that can stop us from winning the war we now face to defend mankind and destroy the British Empire. That's all for your evening report. Signing off, this is Matthew Ogden.